Welcome to BIOS Ventures. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Jory Bell, partner at Playground Global, to the show. Jory, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's kick things off. Jory, do you mind sharing a brief personal introduction for us today?
Yeah, so I'm currently a partner at Playground Global, an early stage deep tech investor. My background was, started out my career in climate change research at MIT, came out to Silicon Valley, spent a number of years at Apple designing laptops, did a couple of startups in the mobile computing space, and then found my way to Playground, where I started out as an operating partner and then eventually became a general partner here.
Oh, incredibly concise, thank you. So we're going to dive into that a lot more, but before we do that, can you share a brief introduction to Playground as well for us? We'd love to get a sense of the firm, maybe some of the core philosophies you espouse.
Yeah, so Playground, all early stage deep tech investing. So Series Seed through B, we invest in areas like next gen compute, so quantum computing, optical computing, new silicon architectures, a lot of robotics and automation, some fundamental software work, but mostly applications into industry verticals like agriculture, logistics, life science lab automation. We invest in aerospace and next-gen manufacturing, and also energy and materials science. And I think one of the reasons we're here today is we also have an engineered biology practice, and that kind of breaks down into some tools, so things like next-gen sequencing, but primarily platform therapeutics, and all of our life science investing is at the intersection of biology and other engineering disciplines. So things like machine learning, machine learning, high performance computing, automation, new assays to feed an automated pipeline, to feed a compute pipeline, and synthetic biology approaches to more explicitly engineering biology in order to improve therapies along lines like controllability, tolerability, targeting, that sort of thing.
That's a really phenomenal.
So we're based here in Palo Alto, California. We are generally comfortable investing in very technical companies. So I think we like to say we are comfortable with very deep technical risk and shallow market risk. So we are frequently, the first investors in, many times academic work that's being translated out of the university. And we have a 40-person team that's largely technical, some operating support, in order to both work on the diligence as we look at companies, but also to help companies after we invest as well.
An absolutely phenomenal platform, and I am excited to dive in further. But for now, let's start at the beginning and talk about your own journey to VC. So as you mentioned, you attended MIT and earned 3 undergraduate degrees in architecture, literature, and Earth, atmosphere, and planetary studies. Quite a mix. And then after graduating, you did some climate research as at the joint MIT Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute program, where you designed, built, and deployed autonomous deep-sea robotics. Just sounds incredibly cool to me. So can you share?
That was a great way to start out a career, for sure. I was lucky.
So can you share a little bit more about your interests and motivations at this early stage of your career?
So at that point, and I think in some ways this will come full circle, I think I was really interested in how to make the world a better place, how to have an impact. And so, at that early stage, I think the risks of climate change were becoming increasingly clear, increasingly evident, and I thought this is somewhere where I could have an impact. So I think the thing that ended up maybe kind of limiting my kind of tenure there was that after a few years, it became clear that the science was already settled and that this was really a political and an economic question more than a science or technology question at that stage. And I think maybe that's where we'll come back to, we are maybe an inflection point where there are technologies that can make a difference, and that the need is great enough that it's risen to, universal or hopefully universal recognition of how existential a threat it is.
It's definitely an important conversation and one I'd love to dive into more, both here later and personally at a different point. But to keep us on track, so from deep sea robotics, as you mentioned, you transitioned to Apple before becoming a founder of a startup yourself, and then the CTO of another, both computer manufacturing companies. And then upon exiting, you became a VP at Playground before becoming a general partner in 2018. Belated congratulations. So
Thank you.
just curious to ask, what led you to pivot from founder to investor?
So it was maybe a two-step process. So definitely one of the things that was most rewarding about being a founder and an entrepreneur was kind of identifying and working with incredibly talented people. And so initially when I was looking to come to Playground, I thought I would have the opportunity to work with a larger group of people tackling a more diverse array of problems, but still kind of be able to bring that capability to help these exceptional scientists and technologists execute. I think what was a little bit unexpected was kind of in the context of participating in the kind of some of the early sourcing and vetting of deep tech companies that Playground was looking at, mostly just because folks in my work were founding some of those companies, and so it was kind of a natural progression. The sort of Socratic process of the Playground partnership, discussing the merits of these companies, kind of really was the final piece to kind of clarify some of the kind of lens through which to assess whether a particular company, its business model, its technology, its team is likely to succeed or fail. And I think that was something I felt I was missing before, and that wasn't what I was looking for. But once I got that, it just became incredibly exciting to start spending more and more time in that arena.
Yeah, and once you find that partnership, it's hard to turn your back on. So while we are on the topic, do you have any advice for current founders who might be considering venture, either as their next step or maybe something down the line?
So I think it's going to vary a lot by person. I personally would have benefited a lot from spending time at venture early on, right? I think I was pretty early in my career when I founded my first company, OQO. That went pretty far, but I think when you see hundreds of deals and discuss the many parameters that go into assessing whether a particular company, its vision, the market it's going into, the technology, and whether that's a good fit for that large market, that I think it's a very challenging assessment to make. I think some people can learn that as an operator. Some people go to business school. Some people are autodidactic. For me, venture was an amazing place to receive that education, and it was a privilege to do that. And so I think so I recommend it a lot as a waypoint. I think whether someone stays in venture is going to depend on whether, like for me, it was something that I never thought of myself as an investor. I had great experiences with the VCs who had invested in my companies, and thought they were value add, but just that wasn't me. I was kind of came from an engineering background, a science background, and it was kind of eye-opening to to find this world and want to pursue that as a career. So I think that I recommend early exposure to it if you have that opportunity to an entrepreneur.
No, and a great recommendation indeed. So now you are at Playground and you're investing, as you described earlier, across a number of early stage deep tech spaces, including on the life science side and things like computational therapeutics, genomics, and synthetic biology. What brought you personally to this intersection of tech and bio?
So I think there were a few, I don't know if trends, I'll say, that we were observing that made that seem compelling. So one is, I think we are a little bit at an inflection point. I think one of my partners will say, that the life sciences has yet to have its industrial revolution, where previously things like therapeutics were very, about biology, artisanal processes, and now we're seeing machine learning, high performance computing, automation, the use of NGS in very creative ways to create large data sets to be leveraged by the ML in order to make things kind of not just be about the biology, but be at this intersection and frequently this melding of compute, automation, and biology. And so I think that was something where the areas where we were strong as a firm in ML, in compute architectures, in building complex instruments, metrology, processing that data at scale, that was a good fit. And we would frequently kind of feel comfortable assessing those aspects of a company. So that's number one. I think number two, something that was a little surprising coming from the tech side of things, was the degree to which it was challenging for first-time scientist founders to get backing from venture capitalists. There's like a very kind of well-developed model in kind of traditional biotech investing, and there's totally exceptions to this, but where the technology and the science is something that's licensed out of academia, and the biotech investors take a huge part of the company. They frequently will put together that management team from experienced people they worked with before, and that's been demonstrated to be a very effective model. But I think we felt it excluded a new generation of young scientist founders who are seeing postdocs and PhDs with computer science degrees or electrical engineering degrees, create these huge impactful companies with the science and technology that they had developed and pushed forward in university. And so I think we believe that it's a lot easier to take someone who has that unique science and technology expertise and help them become a successful entrepreneur than the other way around. So I think those two trends probably are what pushed us in that area. And I think the combination of those two, especially on the therapeutic side, we think there's this opportunity to create platforms now, since you're not like having this artisanal, very serialized kind of extended single asset focus. You're making platforms that are very modular, much more like writing software or writing code, or making an electrical engineering circuit, and being able to use those to create many shots on goal, many potential life-saving drugs. That is obviously going to be super impactful for human health, but also in building these really big businesses, this next wave of really large biotechs.
And I think you summarize it incredibly well. And you're right. I think tech bio, and we'll get into this further as you say, is becoming more and more impactful. And not only is it becoming more impactful, it's enabling first-time founders at that interdisciplinary intersection to really shine. And so excited to discuss that further. But first, and as an aside, one aspect about the Playground website I really enjoyed as I was preparing for this interview were some of the questions that overlay your profiles. And as we look at the Playground team. And so for your question, I noticed you selected what were your must-read book recommendations. And as someone who personally has always loved to read, who's always looking for great recommendations, I'd love to hear your answer, and I guess why.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think my reading is probably broken up between a lot of science fiction and a lot of nonfiction. So I think the most recent nonfiction book that I really recommend would be Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer, which was super relevant to the conversation we're just having, because we're at this cutting edge of investing in new ways of engineering therapies to be more targeted, more precise, deal with just controllability overall. But there's this whole history of how that has kind of developed, for the last several hundred years. So that is really an amazing book. I think on the fiction side, like on the large chunky, I really like large books that you can soak in. So I think the Terra Ignota series by Ada Palmer is pretty incredible. It's like a 4-book, 1,600-page opus that kind of at the intersection of science fiction, philosophy, and religion. So that's one that I recommend. And then I really enjoyed also this is how you lose the time war, which is a really short epistolary, right? Like, so in the form of letters back and forth that two authors wrote together. So
I've made notes and looked up both of them right now, so I'm right there with you on enjoying longer science fiction reads. They help you get immersed in the world, and when you're a speed reader, they give you a little bit more to play with. So,
yep.
turning things back to our main topic today, Playground and Tech Bio. In its 2020 letter, Playground's predictions for the decade ahead, the firm shared its belief that science alone won't move us forward. It needs technology as the primary engine for change. Going back to what we were talking about earlier when you were describing how technology and bio are really melding today to form something powerful. And so historically, we feel like the philosophy of investment in tech has been different from traditional biotech, and you started to describe that. But we've seen that convergence of the two models, where the platform in tech bio today is one of the more powerful assets. Playground was also named one of the top investment firms for early stage biotech companies earlier this year. So we'd love your thoughts on this trend, and as we take it a step further, and as VCs begin to invest in these diverse areas, we'd love to understand how you think about drilling down a little bit further to select specific investment VCs.
Part of the way I think about that kind of science versus technology, it always makes me think, and about the Freeman Dyson book, in The Sun, the Genome, and the Internet, where it talks about the kind of back and forth between developing theories and then developing tools to investigate and kind of further those theories. And I think that I feel like we're in a period now where there's been this, there's been a long period of working on the theory of a lot of biology. And now we're in a period where tools are coming to fruition that allow us to capitalize on that understanding and on that theory and interrogate it in more detail. So that's number one, kind of how I view that. I think a lot of times on the platform therapeutic companies that we're investing in many ways, like the risk profile is very different, right? In that if you are a company like Strand Therapeutics working on working on mRNA therapies, and you were Jake and Tasuku and Professor Weiss back in 2010. You're seeing Moderna and BioNTech or the work that would become those companies. And you're like, well, what are the problems that those companies are going to have once they come to market? They're going to have sustained expression. They're going to have targeting. How would we address that with synthetic biology? And so I think that we see patterns like that where there's a roadmap in an early set of companies that have pioneered a modality, whether that's antibodies, cell therapies, mRNA, ADCs. So all of those kind of, I'll call them emerging modalities, although many of them have now been in the market for a significant amount of time. There's this roadmap in the clinical successes and failures that either tell you if we could fix this thing with a set of engineering tools, then we could bring this therapy to market, or this class of therapies to market that previously were blocked by, say, on target off tumor toxicity and in a like a T cell engager context, for example, or that drugs have gotten through the clinic, but we see what their dose limiting toxicities are, and it's all laid out there. So that roadmap is, very much one that guides an engineering approach, as opposed to we're coming up with novel targets or novel mechanistic theories that we will then build kind of a single or a handful of therapies around. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were asking, but that's what came to mind in response to that. So
I think it makes a lot of sense. And as you're pointing out, as we try to focus a little bit more on where we as investors should engage so we can have that greater impact, it's challenging sometimes to know what's going to be successful. And that's part of where we look at what's occurring today and what, as you were talking about with emerging modalities, might be coming next, and understand, maybe as we look at all of these different potential deals, as we assess all of these different potential technologies, how things maybe sort of mix and match to move forward. and what the different combinations of potential technologies might be needed to really take our biological understanding to that next level and turn this into impact for patients. So let's focus a little bit more specifically on some of your investments. You talked about Strand Therapeutics. We love Jake here. There's also 1910 Genetics, Manifold Bio, and others, but the three I just listed all have phenomenal first-time founders. We'd love to just, I guess, dive deeper and ask, do you have specific investment theses in life sciences and healthcare you're thinking about right now, or specific topic areas you'd like to explore?
Yeah, I think there are 2 or maybe 3 areas that I would highlight. So one is kind of in the vein of this kind of synbio engineering of a modality to kind of, improve it from its kind of maybe very promising but struggling to get through the clinic, or maybe past the clinic but has some limitations, that things like Strand Therapeutics genetic circuits instantiated on self-replicating mRNA is one example. We have Outpace Bio that came out of the Baker lab that's using protein switches to enhance the targeting and controllability of cell therapies. And so I think those are a couple of examples. We think there's more like that in additional modalities where you are taking, what, let's say maybe it's ADCs or something, where, okay, does someone have a toolkit that they can use to improve those in a kind of, a way that's scalable and modular and kind of lends itself to a platform approach. So I think that's one. Another, and I think Manifold Bio is maybe a good example of this, is people who are leveraging tools. In their case, they've kind of transformed, basically proteomics, in vivo proteomics of biologic therapies into an NGS problem, into a sequencing problem. And I think we're seeing more companies that are recognizing, the power of these scalable data acquisition platforms, whether it's NGS combined with single cell or others, to create the data sets in order to kind of refactor the drug development process and have much higher confidence that you can bring a drug successfully to the clinic because you're getting relevant data very early on and at scale. And so I think we are seeing, like, there's a couple of really exciting companies we're engaged with at the moment, very early stage, that have similar patterns to that. And some of that comes from our, experience investing in Ultima Genomics, right? Which has a, that's on the tool side. They, we led their Series A, 5 years ago. They were stealthy forever, past their Series E, just de-stealth. Maybe a lot of your listeners will know AGBT this year. But they have a path, well, not have a path, they have announced and currently are able to offer a human genome at a price point of $100 in comparison with what an Illumina NovaSeq would be able to offer at hundreds or as much as 1,000, depending on what your scale is. But they have a path to go much, much lower cost, and that with that same very high quality standard that people have come to rely on in the NGS area. And so I think seeing those tools coming down the pike make us realize that things that previously you just wouldn't do at scale because it would be far too expensive, once sequencing is 1 or 2 or even more orders of magnitude less expensive than it has historically been, and then there are new applications both on the clinical side, but also on the drug development side. And so we're seeing companies who are leveraging that sort of thing. And I guess the last area that we continue to spend a lot of time in, and I think I don't know if we're quite there yet, but proteomics is really exciting to us as well, especially. So.
All right. Well, it's funny you brought up Ultima. That's one of the areas where I wanted to go next as a great example. And as you mentioned, Ultima was in stealth for a long time. And with its ability to launch and sequence a person's genome for about $100, that offers phenomenal potential in the precision medicine space. Would love to understand Playground's thoughts on investing in what might be considered venture creation when these are such early stage newcos in stealth, but also just precision medicine?
Yeah, so I don't think that was venture creation. That Gilad, who's the founder and CEO, that's really he drove that. So we were privileged to be able to support the company early, but that's his baby. I think the pattern that got us excited about Ultima. So one, I'll say, and we are consistently impressed with the impact that people, technologists, and entrepreneurs coming from semiconductor equipment and manufacturing world, when transitioning those technologies and those engineering management practices to adjacencies like the life sciences, is incredibly powerful. As a civilization, we've spent $1 trillion or something perfecting this ability to make chips at ridiculous scale so we can all have a supercomputer in our pocket. But that a lot of that expertise is just wrapped up in that industry. And I think, to the tools building context that we discussed earlier, transferring those tools into the adjacent industries is extremely powerful. And so, two of my most successful investments come from entrepreneurs coming out of the semiconductor equipment world. And then but again, something like Ultima is a great fit for us because it's really fundamentally interdisciplinary, right? So novel chemistry, novel open flow cell, pattern flow cell based on kind of semiconductor wafers, semiconductor inspection like imaging technology of that, a machine learning based base calling flow, the integration of all that into a very complex instrument. And so I think for us, that's a very comfortable place to be. And it was easy to quickly recognize both the work that the company had already done at that early stages, but also the phenomenal multidisciplinary team. Ultima was maybe 30 people when we invested, and that was comprised of 5 incredible kind of leaders with superstar teams in these disparate disciplines. And it's really unique to see that sort of thing at that early stage. So I always call Ultima my guilty pleasure because it executes so flawlessly. So.
And it's incredible being almost a passenger supporting and watching technologists and a team like that build something so incredible. So I want to dive into that a lot further in a moment, but before that, and with that understanding, and thank you, of Playground's investment areas, would love to pivot a little bit more, and you started to touch on this, into how you and the folks at Playground select which companies you invest in. So from the Playground website, it mentions that you leverage your vision and deep understanding of technology to help build companies for multi-generational impact. You've described this a bit, and as you've said, there's always the tech, the team, the science, or the tech, the science, the team, the market. Can you describe what you look for in your diligence process, especially when it comes to multi-generational impact? How do you separate maybe the signal from the noise when assessing companies upfront?
So I think part of that separation comes from, we are usually building roadmaps and then looking for technologies frequently that are still in the academic context that we think are addressing kind of key pain points or key needs that address a particular problem. So I think it's less about just responding to what's kind of coming over the transom and more about kind of finding those, frequently before their companies, and that's number one. I think we have a pretty deep technical team on the life sciences side. I partner very closely with my colleague Ben Kim, has a bioengineering PhD from Stanford, and so we are digging into the literature, meeting with the professors, the PhDs, the postdocs, and trying to understand kind of what's coming from that would be a fit for us at that early stage. And then I think the next thing for us that ends up being critical, and this is less about maybe maybe it is the separation of those two things, is we are betting not on just ideas or science and technology, but on entrepreneurs. So is there someone who's coming out of this academic context who we think is going to be the leader of that company? We are also almost exclusively investing in companies where it's not one cool trick that was developed in a university. It is the beginning of a roadmap that, even at its earlier stages, has profound implications and applications, but gets better and better over time, but requires the stewardship of the people who, instantiated and kind of shepherded it at its early stages to see its full potential. So I think, finding those two things, the really profoundly impactful science and technology, and a lot of times, we see that in papers, or we see that, by focusing on labs that have a style of solving problems that we are excited by. But then finding those entrepreneurs as well. And sometimes you find the science and don't have the entrepreneurs, or vice versa. So it's really those two things. And I think in some ways, the platform therapeutics is in some ways simpler in that you can have really big successes in terms of both health outcomes and business outcomes if the science and technology works, right? It's not a fundamentally complicated business model. You do need to be on top of that, and definitely there's aspects of that you need to do earlier than one would hope in terms of making sure you're going to have a success. But yeah, that's a relatively straightforward place to play. So in some ways, again, it seems more amenable to first-time scientist founders than other areas where it may be all about a software business model change that's not necessarily, like, maybe it's linked to a technology, but Google had to come from both how they did search, but also how to monetize search. And this is a little more straightforward.
That's a good point. And I think the approach you describe is incredibly proactive. So I guess I'd be curious to understand, do founders often reach out to Playground? Is Playground always finding founders? Is it a joint process in which sometimes either happens?
But I think it's both. Like, we try to find founders who are maybe not yet on their founder journey, and see if they want to push in that direction. We also have people coming to us. I think the one thing that I think resonates with kind of these very technical founders is we are first and foremost interested in understanding the technology that they're building. Can they build it? How do they view that? And wanting to make sure that our vision is aligned with theirs. But again, that's really ends up being mostly about the vision for what a technology can do from this very early stage, and do they have a path to get there, and do they have a path with a testable, with a hypothesis that can be tested with a bounded amount of time and money, and we can help them say, okay, if you can get to that stage, then you can raise this next money and take it even further. So
makes sense. That being the case, then, do you have any recommendations for founders who are trying to reach out and who are thinking about working with Playground?
So the one thing that I'll say that's a little bit not exactly what you're asking, but that it's pretty critical to not only find a firm that does things that look like things you do, right? But also try to identify the partners, the individual partners from firm websites or LinkedIn who invest in the kinds of companies that you are hoping to build. I'm surprised at how frequently we'll get things that just are not deep tech at all, or just a little bit off. And so I think that'll increase your likelihood of success. After that, there's a lot of different ways that you can get to a founder. You can message us on LinkedIn. You can send we have an inbound email on our website. You can get introductions from academics or other founders. There's lots of ways, and we try to be open to all of those channels. And in some ways, it's easier for us because we're fundamentally judging the science. So it's not about, does this person have a network or a clever thing. It's about, do they have the most innovative ideas. And we tend to like approaches that are pretty differentiated. And so, maybe something that is a less common way of solving a problem. Like if anything, when we were first looking at strand therapeutics in, was that 2017 or so, the biggest challenge diligencing that was there was no one else doing anything comparable at the time that we could use as a benchmark, right? So, but that's also exciting to us. It might take us longer to dig in. And then the only other thing I'll say for folks that are kind of coming inbound to us is definitely as a firm, we are enthusiastic about and appreciate more data, more detail on the technology. Like the one thing that I will say, I and some of us here might find frustrating is the YC style pitch, which is very curated to focus on the market opportunity and the particular big picture. And for us, it's about understanding the technology first. And then, if the technology is super compelling, then that next level of assessment is on the market opportunity is important, right? Because I can, as a founder myself, and you definitely, it'll still take 5 or 10 years of your life to work on a mediocre idea that might have a small outcome versus a great idea that will have a big outcome. And so everyone we're seeing is of such a caliber that I encourage them to focus on big ideas that can have big outcomes, because it's not going to be less work, and it may be more work because it gets more and more challenging to get the resources you need for a smaller idea, unless it's not a venture business, which is there's a whole set of businesses, there's a tangent, but that probably shouldn't be venture businesses, but are also good businesses and doing important things. So,
and
stick a pin in that one.
Oh, we can bring you back for another discussion then. I'm going to just, what you've just said on the YC style pitch really resonates. And I'm going to just double down on that for anyone listening who's going through YC. I know they're pushing to get more involved in bio right now, and that's phenomenal. Always love seeing support for early stage bio entrepreneurs. By the same token, we want to see more data in the pitch. It's very frustrating to get a short deck with just a few high level overview ideas. Trust us, we want something more to go off of.
And that's okay if you want to save that for a pitch. It doesn't have to be all data dumped maybe, but I think the most rewarding commentary I've heard in a few years was a number of times entrepreneurs or who have been told that, oh, you're pitching Playground, you should go into some more technical depth and maybe don't hold your kind of more scientifically nerdy co-founder back. Let him loose on that one. So
that's a huge compliment. And so, in addition to your investing in early stage companies, Playground also provides really significant support for its portfolio companies in a number of ways, one of which is through a community of engineers, designers, technologists, all working in a 70,000 square foot facility with 5 different world-class labs. So this is, I wouldn't say unique, but really stood out to me among potential portfolio support opportunities, and would just love to hear a little bit more about Playground's lab facilities and generally how they support your startups.
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces there. So first, we have our facility is large. A bunch of our portfolio companies are co-located with us, although that's not at all a requirement. We invest all over the country and all over the world. And then the shops and labs, support folks in the building, but also outside. So, probably the biggest demand is for our prototyping facility, which, has done a lot of work, for example, in microfluidics for some of our companies. I think over time, what we've seen, other than the prototyping facility, is and also a kind of an electrical engineering facility, that more of the companies that are in the building end up wanting to build out their own labs. And so historically, when I contemplated this question, I was like, oh, historically, I was going to say it's mostly been our more kind of electronics, optics oriented companies that have benefited. But at the moment, we have a stealth company that is in the building that has their first life sciences lab booted up. So So I think we're seeing that change over time.
No, that's really exciting. And
then I think the other thing that's probably more impactful than the facility, at least I hope so, is our about 40-person team of engineers, scientists, and operators who engage with the company to help them. And a lot of that's really basic, but critical things like technical hiring, engineering management, comms and PR. We have a design team to help with logo, website, pitch decks. I think the core of what the company does is the company, and we can help them kind of build out the rest of that and kind of pitch in where we can around the edges. So
enable the entrepreneurs to keep moving quickly by providing that additional, we don't want to say more standardized support, because in each case has to be more targeted, but providing that sort of back office support, as it were.
Yeah.
So as we think about the lengthy life cycle of life sciences and healthcare companies, especially those in the tech bio space, where we're seeing that melding of two disciplines or even more coming together, as we were talking about earlier, and you just mentioned getting involved in assisting with hiring. We know that building teams and building company cultures with intention, often from the beginning, can be really critical. And so we'd just love to hear, how do you think about supporting such early teams, such interdisciplinary teams, as they go around hiring and building a long-lasting company culture?
So, I guess my first thought is that I found that the kind of younger crop of scientists and technology entrepreneurs inherently have a strong emphasis on building a community within their company and a culture in their company. And so that's surprisingly at the forefront in a way that is gratifying. And so I think that's across, not just in our engineered biology, but across our portfolio. I think that's something that's great to see and is maybe different than what an old venture person might expect. I think for us, the cultural nuances that I find most notable on the engineered biology side are in how to bridge or meld the biology and the compute, those two domains. And so I think how do you build out, is that inherently having hybrid vigor of people, the core of people at the outset who are experts in both of those domains? Is it building a translation layer and kind of formalizing the way that information moves between those two? And so I think, and that becomes more complicated when it's not just two, but it's maybe 5 different domains that all have their own lingua franca and kind of modus operandi. Throw in buzzwords galore there. So I think
it's getting more complicated even today with work from home, right? If you have a set of individuals who are able to work from home and the others who have to be in lab on site, it can be even more challenging to really make sure people come together into one cohesive team. But from the beginning of your investment career more broadly, you've had a very future forward, very tech enabled investment perspective. And in the predictions for the next decade letter we talked about earlier, you're quoted talking about things like programmable smart therapeutics, as you've highlighted, and things accelerating opportunities in genomic sequencing, like Ultima, like Strand. So we'd just love to hear, what have you been seeing from founders, from academics, professors, in terms of the next cycle of emerging technologies? Would so love to know what you're really excited by.
Yeah, again, I think there's definitely, like, it's almost too reductionist to call them new assays, but a set of new ways of probing biology in order to generate scaled data sets that then allow you to optimize, engineer, control therapies, enzymes, what have you. So I think that trend is not just NGS, and it's not just one modality of generating data, but getting more and more sophisticated in the scale and the kind of precision of that data generation, which is so critical, like, for enabling the use of machine learning in particular. And so that's number one, the ongoing development of those tools.
Let's turn that around. We've talked about what you're excited by. Is there anything you think might need a little bit more development before it's ready for prime time?
Well, actually, that's maybe one and the same a little bit. And so I think the areas that an area that we are excited about, but don't know if we're at the right inflection point, is maybe around the use of synthetic biology in particular for non-therapeutic applications. I think the therapeutic applications, as I kind of highlighted earlier, if there's so many big problems that if you can solve those problems, they're quite valuable. And that there's a roadmap for how to get that value across the line. I think it's been more challenging in how do we change, whether it's biofuels or capturing industrial waste gases and converting them into fish feed or bioplastics or what have you. So I think there's a bunch of applications, improved enzymes that can green a process that may currently be toxic or have huge energy inputs. And so we are seeing more of those applications. And I think the technology is coming to fruition, but the combination, I think the economics of solving some of those problems is much more challenging. The margins are not the same as in therapeutics. And so it adds this layer of complexity that we, that as I described, largely sidestep with our focus on platform therapeutics and kind of DX tools. But we think that's important, especially as we're trying to address some of these big challenges like climate change and the things that follow on from that in terms of feeding the planet, reducing the footprint and of what all those activities are doing. So I think that's an area that we continue to be very active in and are trying to find where is that inflection point, in one application, in a set of applications. But I think we're pretty close. And kind of notably, I think there is a set of later stage capital. That's, if you look back to the last, the wave of, green tech in the 1990s and 2000s, I would say, a reasonable assessment of the failure there was a combination of the technologies not being ready for prime time, but also there not being later stage capital support for what are very capital intensive efforts. And so I think both of those things are close to changing now, and we just have to make sure we time that correctly so you're not on the wrong side of that. So
especially in the current market. And so as we think about that, and it's interesting thinking about more of the SynBio side, especially as we consider consumer-facing commercial applications. Because at that point as well, it's not just the technologists that need to be involved. You also need founders who know how to build a brand around it. Part of the reason those companies, I think, are challenging is because of that duality. It's not just the margin and the unit economics around the science. It's also, how do you make this sexy? How do you build that technology brand? And having a team that can do both is something I think it requires a special group. And so I'm looking forward
and I think
to seeing more.
We've largely, there are definitely areas kind of within the realm that we were just discussing where that has been really evident. A lot of the alternative protein type companies have that duality, for example. And in general, we won't make those investments and shy away kind of largely from even, at the outset when I was describing where we invest, I'm tempted to say, deep B2B deep tech businesses, because we don't like companies that have a consumer business, because that adds this kind of particular flavor of market risk that a lot of times can be solved by the right application of money and marketing. It isn't fundamentally about, does this technology work or not? And for us, we again are comfortable underwriting a very scary and challenging technology, and less comfortable with underwriting that kind of market go-to-market activity. And largely for us, then those companies aren't a fit for us. So we have to find ways of where in the market, and there are success stories for sure, out there, but they're early ones so far.
No, agreed. And I think we're both excited for a time when biology can be more impactful in the climate space, as you're saying. And I think, as you say, we're starting to get there. So what then is coming next for Playground?
So, I mean, I think we've touched on most of those points. So I think we're continuing to focus on the engineered biology side. Kind of DX tools is right up our alley in terms of being at that intersection of kind of compute and complex instrumentation in biology. But, I think it's really hard to get multi-billion-dollar outcomes in the DX tools space, right? Like something like Ultima Genomics is the exception to the rule. And there's a lot of good companies that are made there that aren't going to have that kind of outcome. And I think for us, especially with the kind of tech and tech bio ownership profiles that we have, we need those big home runs of multi-billion-dollar outcomes to potential multi-billion-dollar outcomes. Again, I think the platform therapeutics, we're seeing, if anything, an embarrassment of riches at this point of really compelling opportunities there. And so that one is, it's going to be, again, an embarrassment of riches, and just selecting the ones that we think are really a good fit for our thesis. And so those are those two areas there. I think, we're continuing to look at SynBio as applied to non-therapeutic applications. There are challenges, but we think there will be exceptional companies that are built there. And then I think we're spending, and this kind of is, again, phases over from that kind of SynBio into non-therapeutic applications. We're spending more time on materials and energy and fuels and that sort of thing as well.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see how all of these things are applied and progress. But in the meantime, a few rapid fire questions before we close out. In the current economic climate, it feels almost like the rate of technology commercialization has slowed a bit as compared to the last decade. Do you have any advice for, and maybe you disagree, and if so, push back, but do you have any advice for early stage founders seeking to launch companies in the next few months?
Yeah, so apparently I'm transparent because I was going to push back. I'm not sure. I would have said the opposite, that it seems like it's accelerating. And the trick is, or what that brought to mind is, especially in these platform therapeutics companies, is this delicate balance between pushing the platform forward, which will eventually give you the most value, many shots on goal, big impact, and needing to very thoughtfully progress a pipeline and an initial asset. And, it's definitely been, I'll say, sobering to see how, after the seed stage, going into the A's and the B's, some of those investors, will increasingly still judge a company based on the quality of an asset. They may still want you to have a platform, and they're supportive of the platform. And so I think there's a lot of that balance between pushing the platform forward and the first asset forward, and making the right choices about therapeutic area and indication, and what kind of targets are in vogue or not, is something that is, I think our companies have done a good job and/or been lucky in navigating that. But that's something that I would highlight to founders as they're building kind of technology first platforms, is that you need to get that in-house expertise to, and/or be enthusiastic about engaging with that yourself as founders to push that forward. So that's the balance. But I'd say and I guess in terms of the speed, I would say most of the areas we're investing, the speed to get to a particular stage of therapeutic development is increasing, not decreasing. So something like Manifold gets you in vivo data at scale very early in a process, whereas before that would be years down the line, and you can triage things and get there much faster. Things like all of them are very modular in their basis. So the ability to kind of reconfigure things to expand the pipeline to address new indications and new therapeutic areas. So in some ways, it's, I maybe went on too much at length there, but I think it's a combination of, I think things are speeding up, but it's increasingly making for a lot of resource allocation choices in these companies, because they're not just developing one therapeutic based on one biological thesis. They have a ton of them. How do they navigate that? How can they push that platform and all of them together while also still making sure that the core of the pipeline is progressing in a way that will get them into the clinic and get them follow-on capital?
That's a phenomenal answer for any founders listening. And today, it seems like we've talked a lot about inflection points and how we're at not many, at the intersection of technology and biology, at the intersection of applying biology and life sciences to potential climate change solutions, at the intersection of technology commercialization from that accelerating perspective, and how it can move things forward faster, but how business model or business allocation perspectives are really going to need to be assessed carefully. And so, considering all of these crossroads, you've been a founder, you've been in startups, you've been in investing. With everything happening today, we talked about what's coming next for Playground. More broadly, what do you think is coming next for venture?
I mean, my answer may be a little self-serving, but I think one thing that's going to happen is the generalist investor, a lot of the areas that generalist investors have relied on making money have become a little bit cookie cutter or formulaic, such that later stage capital can move in and just invest early, and the metrics for a SaaS company are known. There's not the same magic or guesswork of how is this going to fail or succeed. And so I think that leads to kind of a fewer number of more specialized niches, right? For us, that's the science and technology, focus, deep tech efforts in these business, in these areas where we think there are, big inflection points happening in the combination of the economy and the technology base itself. And some of that time is through combinations, some of it's just kind of culminations of things that have been developing for a long time. And so I think that others will similarly need to either kind of, they'll either be challenged to continue existing as a small generalist investor, or they're going to have to specialize. And there are lots of other kind of specialties that exist, whether it's security or Web3 or what have you.
It's something I think I agree with, and I love being involved at the early stage, helping technologies get moved forward. So excited to be here, and excited, I think, along with you, to keep pushing the field forward. But before we come to a close, any shameless plugs, any closing thoughts? Just want to leave the floor open to you.
No, I mean, it's thank you so much for having me. I definitely am a part of the BIOS community, and really listen to and am a fan of the BIOS podcast. So everyone should check out everything that you put out.
Oh, thank you for shamelessly plugging us, Jory. It's great to have you on, and I really appreciate your commentary. Absolutely fantastic episode. Very grateful for your time. Thank you again.
Thank you, my pleasure.